Conversations on Co-Production is Expert Link's free monthly meeting where people come along to chat all things co-production with like-minded individuals. These podcast episodes are taken directly from the conversations, so if you like what you hear, come along and join us by signing up via the link below.
So for me, co-production, it's like what he says, it gave me a voice. When I was going through services and really difficult times, it gave me a voice, and I was heard. And my experience of services up to that point had been something that was top down, that was done to me. And through co-production, it was my first time where I felt more on an even keel with professionals, and it did wonders for my confidence, especially when some of the ideas and things that I had were actually considered and put into action, put into practice. It was incredibly rewarding. And it was my first step in my recovery journey was co-production, so that's why I'm so passionate.
Co-production and involvement and all of those things can be a bit of a journey which can support people's mental health. So if it's done properly and it's done well and the support's in place, people can start with something quite straightforward and don't have to commit to too many things, if you see what I mean. So it can be something that they can kind of just take a little step out of their comfort zone and, be supported and do well in that, and then move forward. And we've had people that have gone from sort of just maybe attending a meeting to then wanting to be part of presenting a training program for people. Obviously there's a big journey in between those, but I think it can be part of a development process that is supporting mental health at the same time. But it needs to be done properly, and it needs to be done in a supported way so that people feel that they can kind of test that stuff out, but in safe ways, and kind of build their confidence and their self-esteem and their skills that way.
Sometimes it's the first time that people have got a little bit of stability, isn't it? And about the peer support that is there as well. And that peer support, sort of wraparound support, is really, really important, isn't it? So that would be the first time that they sort of access that. And also then with the stability comes the time where they're able to sort of distinguish that there is an underlying mental health condition maybe as well, that then, and their stability wise, then the mental health teams are happier to work with people and stuff. So that's all I was going to say.
I'm a great believer that if you're with people that have higher standards than you, then you raise your standards. But likewise, if you have people with lower standards, so it's about connecting people with really healthy peers who are, a bit more stable and maybe a bit further along in the journey, and can have real benefits for improved mental health and mental well-being. And as it says, we've got like a load of stuff in place now, which has dropped out of our co-production forum, where we've got a big well-being walk tomorrow, where we're getting the team of peer mentors is going to be there, but there's also going to be people who this might be the first tentative steps back into the world, outside world again, and it's about just putting a sort of supportive arm around those people, and the well-being walk, and just having a really informal chat. And it's incredible to be a part of it, very rewarding.
I think the benefits as well of co-production is about building people's skill set, isn't it? And building their confidence, then that they know that they then have built new skill sets, and that then, helps when it seeks employment later down the line, builds confidence in dealing with professionals on an equal thing, which I think someone said, didn't they, about it being more of an equal playing field and stuff. So I think co-production is really, really important for that. And it also opens up opportunities when you network and mingle with people and find new opportunities and stuff, which is important also.
I sometimes aftercare and planning in aftercare can be a real challenge, especially if it's like an allotted time, and people forget that after a workshop, co-production partners are still going to go away with the feelings that they had within that workshop. And I feel like sometimes not having the capacity or the expertise to provide that aftercare is a real barrier for mental health within co-production. Getting involved to build like training and skill sets for co-production partners has been like a huge benefit, and also in our case, like being able to provide in some cases like references for them to move on, and truly like encouraging co-production partners to go for opportunities that they aspire to has been so I'm told a really cool benefit to their well-being and health as well.
It's putting yourself in other people's shoes. So like tomorrow I'm meeting the guys and doing the walk, but I communicate with my colleagues and everybody that's invited. I'm going around and doing a little taxi and picking them up, and and taking the ones that have got those anxieties, taking a little road trip to the venue and making sure they get back okay, and then communicating with the other workers who's client, that it won't always be my client, it might be one of my teammates' clients, and just communicating and keeping up. And that
often when people are really enjoying working co-productively and they're enjoying working as part of different programs and things, and all of those things we've talked about in terms of benefits and self-esteem and confidence, it can be tricky sometimes. People tend to keep saying yes to wanting to be part and wanting to be involved, and I think there's an element of, and it's about that relationship, isn't it? It's about building that relationship and going back to the support that's in place for people, but it's about being able to have conversations with people around what's the workload like at the moment, what else have you got going on. It just kind of keeping people in I guess like just a reality check a little bit sometimes about, is this going to be too much for you? And if people are kind of saying no, it's absolutely fine, that's fine. But I think we just have to be aware sometimes that it's very easy to get caught up in that the positivity of it all, and wanting to feel like we're giving something back and we've got a purpose and all of those things, and that actually ultimately can end up being a detriment because people get overwhelmed and kind of say yes to things and then they're feeling like they've got to commit to those things. So for me, that's something quite important that we need to think about, I think, in terms of people's well-being and stuff.
When someone's come through services and then suddenly they're co-producing within that sort of service or area, the confidence to say no is really hard, isn't it? Because our automatic reactive thing is to say yes initially, isn't it? So, and then people keep saying yes, 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 and it gets too much and they don't want to share their story, but the service is wanting that for their co-production, to hear all that stuff and push them to do that stuff. And that can have a real impact, can't it, on how people are feeling about themselves.
Who supports the people doing co-production. So for me, my experience over the last few years has been very much that co-production works best when there's a facilitator or a support worker or somebody having a regular contact and check-in with the people doing co-production, so that they can build up relationships with them, but also just keep an eye on them in terms of their mental well-being, and just make sure that if there's anything that's needs signposting, that they can pick that up really quickly. When I feel like it doesn't go so well is when co-production gets tagged onto somebody's job and they're not maybe experienced in it and they don't have the time to really support people properly. And then quite often I think people feel overwhelmed, or they get lost somehow in just the work itself, rather than investing in the people doing the co-production, which I feel is, for me, we often get asked, or how many people have you contacted? How many people are involved in your service? And for me, it's not really about quantity, it's about quality of experience. So I would rather work with 5 people than 50 if those 5 people have an amazing experience working with us, and they feel fully supported within the role that they're undertaking.
I think something else that's worth kind of thinking about as well is the processes behind people being involved, because one, they can all be really, really different, even in a very small area, depending on how people want to access kind of doing co-production work. But it's sometimes they can be quite overwhelming in their own right. So in all, somebody might be really interested in being part of something, and you've had that conversation and you've built that relationship, but then actually to be involved, they have to fill in this massive long document and complete this process and be part of this, for example, be on bank staff, which has come up recently in certain things. And just, that whole process of them maybe getting expenses back can be really tricky. So they don't want to ask. So then potentially they end up out of pocket. So I think there's something that as a kind of wider group, we need to think about the processes for people being involved in different pieces of work. And as much as lots of us have processes that can't necessarily be changed very easily, but it's about how do we support people. And it goes back to what Tasha was saying, if there needs to be the support for people to manage their way through those processes. That should be our issue as organisations, not for the people that are kind of that we want to help and work with us.
With our peer mentors, what we have a fortnightly peer support group, because we know that the people that we're working with at the minute are in that transitionary sort of phase in their lives between services and sort of full independence. And life's hard, you know, especially with the current financial climate and stuff like that. And there's a lot of stuff going on. But what we've tried to foster is a spirit of peer support within the group, you know, and I think it's proven quite successful. It was my plan to do these groups once a month, but the demand is such that we're doing them once every 2 weeks. I would also like to say that the biggest impact for me and I know the people that we're working with at the minute who are starting to come into CoPro is anxiety and overcoming that social anxiety, because a lot of the people we work with are very, very isolated and, you know, they lead very cut off existences. So it's about helping and support them. You know, we say in recovery as well, it's like the first step is getting their arse in the seat, you know, is getting them through the door. And then, you know, helping them overcome those. But, you know, anxiety is the biggest sort of obstacle we face to getting people actually involved in co-production at the moment.
We did an interview thing with somebody and around like youth and their youth and stuff like that. And a lot of things came up and he felt quite, he was in a bad place after it. So that wasn't a good, you know, sometimes you've got to think about the questions and stuff like that. And I think you've got to make them aware how much to share and to keep themselves safe, really. I
was just going to say about the boundaries thing as well, because, you know, people are at different stages in their recovery or something's going on for them and they're not 100% stable. I think it's really important that it has to be managed really well, because that can sort of put out a group quite easily, can't it? And it can, you know, it can have really bad consequences for people.
It goes back to all the stuff we've talked about in other sessions around trust and doing co-production properly, doesn't it? And not saying you're doing co-production when you're not. Because I think that has a massive impact on people's sort of mental well-being and just self-esteem and all the things we've talked about. But if you engage people and kind of promote that you're doing this piece of work and it's going to be co-produced and blah 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 and all of that, and then actually the reality is that's not the case, or there's no feedback, or nothing happens, or it is quite patronizing and it's just a consultation or whatever it might be. But if you're not doing it properly, then that's going to impact on how people are feeling about the process itself and what they've done, but also about their involvement and their purpose and what they can bring to sort of, you know, potentially future situations, and then their sort of mental well-being as they move away from that as